Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Dr. Robert Collins, a young agnostic doctor happily rolling along full of himself when he had a quiet little quasi-mystical experience that had the effect of slapping him awake. He is the author of a new book, You Visited Me, Grace and Healing in the Modern Medical Center by Ignatius Press. Robert, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Very glad to speak with you. And a very touching book. I appreciated reading through it. It's a bit of a heartwarming read and gut-wrenching in some areas, but I also appreciate how accessible you made it. I want to begin by asking you to share your background just before we talk about the experience itself.
Currently I'm a physician. I'm an oncologist. Take care of patients with blood cancers. It's mostly lymphoma and leukemia. Here at a medical school in Dallas, University of Texas, Southwestern. And I run a program, so I administer a big program that takes care of these patients and delivers all the therapies that they receive. So that's what I'm doing currently. My background is I grew up in a wonderful family. My mother was Baptist and raised me Baptist. I was baptized in the Baptist church at age 9 or so. Just a wonderful mother. And my father was very wonderful too. A good moral man and very smart and, really instilled a lot of good virtues in his children. He was very much of a doubter, though, I would say, and it sort of rubbed off on me. And by the time I was a teenager, I think I had pretty much completely lost whatever faith I had had. And mainly in sort of a smart aleck teenager sort of a way, just asking some tough questions but not really interested in the answers because I figured I had them already, that kind of thing. And so I went to medical school out of high school. There was a 6-year program where you could get your BA and MD in 6 years, and just loved the science and loved the medicine and was doing really just fine. I was doing very well. I mean, I was a good doctor and a promising young trainee in a big research program, and felt like I just had no need for God. I never thought about God. Life was just fine. And so then I'm working in this laboratory at this moment that you mentioned in the introduction, just talking over the deep science with my colleague, my mentor there. And just one of these very interesting, fascinating scientific discussions. It's just moving along at a fast pace. And at some point in the middle of that, I just heard a voice sort of off to the side that said, isn't this too amazing to have just happened? And it was the sort of question I never would have asked myself, and I don't know why. It's the sort of question that you should. I was very much into the how, though, and not the why, not the deeper questions. And this, Chris and I were the only ones in the lab, and there's nobody else there, so that voice wasn't me, wasn't him, but it had the effect of waking me up. It was just like a slap out of a deep sleep, just telling me that I had been skating along on the surface and was missing something deep. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew that I had to seek it. So from that moment on, I found myself seeking.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I wanted to ask if you could dive a little deeper into the way you were raised in terms of thinking about questions like beauty, for example, or truth. Given your Baptist upbringing, it's clear that you had a lean toward the sciences, but did you have the avenue of asking these bigger questions?
I don't think so. I mean, I just don't think it ever really occurred to me. I think that they were vaguely there. For example, I loved a few activities that I was involved in where we would end up outdoors in the woods, camping, hiking. And I just always felt that there was something special about that. But I would just have to say the idea of beauty, well, no, actually, you get me thinking here. I think God's always touching you along the way, isn't he? And there might be the dramatic moment, but early on, certainly I loved music when I was young. I learned to play the piano, although not all that well. But, loved music, loved classical music. The truth, for sure. I mean, my dad was just a very moral, honest man, and there was, you always tell the truth. I can't tell you how many times I heard that from him. But in terms of like a deeper truth, what underlays all of that, I think, I just don't think that was part of my upbringing.
I appreciate you saying this because you have a chapter where you talk about encountering one of the most beautiful movies you've ever watched, and that got me to thinking that your heart seemed to be able to recognize it. But let's go a little further back. You breeze through medical school. Your mind. Oh, I mean, in the 6 years, immediately after high school, your mind gets attuned to viewing the world from this very empiricist point of view. How did that affect the way you thought about your relationships?
I think it led to shallow relationships. Very very empirical. You're right. Incredibly interesting how the eye works and how the ear works, but never thinking about how it came to be. Some of my relationships, I would just have to say, were very acquisitive. I was very fortunate to meet my wife, who saw something in me, and she's a wonderful woman, and was a true source of grace for me. And I think began to pull something out of me. Again, just all these episodes of grace that the Lord throws your way, I think that you can especially begin to recognize when you look back at it. So, nevertheless, when you're just full of yourself and thinking no more deeply than how it works, then I think you're missing out on, and obviously you're missing out on deep relationships. And I just think that was not a part of my life up in those years, up until God woke me up and began to sort of pour His grace into me.
There are a few thinkers that you either cite multiple times in your footnotes or you mention, David Bentley Hart being one of them. And it's very clear, too, from your story, you went from completely not considering anything outside of empiricism to suddenly seeking it out completely. So share with us a little bit of what triggered that.
Well, what triggered that was that moment where it just suddenly the question was asked of me that I had never asked myself, and it's the deepest of all questions. And it was even hard to say what was it asking, but I think in retrospect, essentially it was just saying, isn't it amazing that this is even here? Why is this even here? Why does anything exist? And that gets you thinking about that, the deepest of all questions, and the other deep questions. What's the purpose of our life? Why are we here? Death, morality, God. And so I found myself reading feverishly about that in subjects that I really didn't used to read in much before, philosophy and theology. But a lot of other experiences, not just certainly not just an intellectual quest. I mean, I think the Lord was touching me from other angles, and one would be nature. Again, I think sort of drawing on some of these things that had touched me before. Just the beauty of nature. I talk in the book about an experience at Rocky Mountain National Park where it's just like one after another genuinely numinous experience. And music, and just listening to some of Beethoven's late music in the middle of the night in the dark, and just so touched by it, so touched by the yearning that was in his music. Being touched by the starry skies. I mean, I'd grown up in the suburbs and I'd really never seen a full-on night sky with the Milky Way, running down the middle of it. The love that I had for my children, and there is nothing like when your children come along and the love that you immediately feel for them. And then one after another, it's the same kind of love. I mean, you're beginning to get this sense of the infinity of God's love. A strong sense of right and wrong, I think, that my dad had given me, and beginning to wonder where that comes from, what underlies that.
I'm talking with Dr. Robert Collins. He is the author of You Visited Me, this new book by Ignatius Press, and he is a practicing physician. And right now we are talking about his conversion experience, which he notes in this book, Grace and Healing in the Modern Medical Center. Continuing on the other side, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Mark Speeder, talking with Dr. Robert Collins, author of You Visited Me, Grace and Healing in the Modern Medical Center. So, Robert, as you mentioned earlier, that moment where that voice spoke to you in the laboratory and forced you to ask those very crucial questions, you, in different ways, start thinking about looking into different sources, including mere Christianity. It's so funny, in the West, for some odd reason, I've just come to believe everyone has a copy of Mere Christianity,
Yeah.
even if they're not Christian.
Oh, that's so true. Yes. I think that was an absolutely remarkable book that has touched so many lives. Certainly touched mine.
So tell us about reading Mere Christianity, and you also mentioned Pascal at some point in your book, too. So these different intellectual arguments, how did they help you grapple with this question of why is there something instead of nothing?
Well, I mean, I guess from the question, I began to intuit that there might be religious answers to this, and you just come across these nuggets of wisdom. Mere Christianity was a big, long nugget of wisdom, basically, which provided for me what Lewis would call that more than a schoolboy's faith. And his point was that so many people who had rejected faith had rejected as a teenager, say, or something like that, this sort of immature faith that they'd held as a kindergartner. So it's no surprise. You just need to grow up, and that had certainly been the case in my sense. So just a nice, long, well-written, rational description of the basics of the faith. Pascal, you mentioned, you just would come across a nugget now and then that would strike home so deeply. One is the greatest achievement of reason is to appreciate that there is an infinity beyond our reason, and it just was so true. There's only so much our reason can do. Or the one that says the heart has its reasons that reason knows nothing of. So I love Pascal, and other writing that I came across. Brothers Karamazov was an incredible book, and it's just I kept seeing it mentioned here or there, and supposedly a great book. I thought I'd just check it out and see what the deal was, and it blew me away. I could not put the book down. I just read it in a few nights, and it affected me deeply, and there was so much in that book, and it's hard to say what, but I mean, what had the particular effect on me. But I think one in particular was this sort of quiet message of that book about interconnectedness. It's sort of the deep theme that runs through the book, and just the idea that we are interconnected in pretty much every way, but especially our lives are. And, the slightest evil action will ripple on forever and ever, and will be a much huger action than you would have thought. But the smallest good action, too, will ripple on, and will counter that bad action. And that's how God works in the world. But understanding that, about that ripple of badness that goes on from every one of our lives, helped me to just understand deep down the effect of my own sinfulness, my shortcoming, my missing the mark. And it helped me develop sort of a genuine sense of forgiveness, which we brought into the clinic sometimes. I mean, there's one story in there where we talk about I and really the rest of the staff being able to forgive a patient who almost seemed unforgivable, but it's just the team interacting with her in that way allowed her to change and open up to where God then poured a remarkable grace into her, and I dare say turned her into a saint.
Share with us about this patient. You wrote about her in your book alongside other patients as well, but share about this particular patient. What was the exchange like, and how did that shape how you thought about your faith and your interactions with this particular patient?
Well, she was a young woman in a really bad situation, and she knew it, and I think she reacted to that with just hatred, and I think deep down it was fear and raging at the injustice of it all. But basically, she was raging at us and taking out everything on us and using her creative powers to bring this or that nurse to tears. And we just have to deal with that every day. But eventually, we just said, this is hurting her care, and we have got to, come up with a better way of taking care of her. And so this is where I think this insight helped us, and it wasn't just me; it was the whole team, to say, how do we think we would feel if we were in this sort of a circumstance? And we've got to meet her where she is, and so we've got to forgive her, and we've got to treat her well. And so from that moment on, the team, especially the nurses, would just respond to her meanness with love. And within a fairly short time, an amazingly short time, it just sort of took away this edifice of hatred and anger that she had. And again, it opened her up to grace from God. I mean, she became a much kinder person to us, but she especially found herself going down to see a priest who had some sort of a healing ministry, kind of a faith healing ministry. And she asked me if I thought, if I believed in God, and I said, yes, I do. By then, I certainly did. And did she think, did I believe in miracles? And that's where I quoted that Pascal thing, that who knows? Who knows how it works? But I encouraged her to go, and she had this just remarkable spiritual experience down there that was really transformative for her, and took her from where she had become a nice person to she was just an incredible person. And I mean, I've never really seen anything like this at all, to see someone who was so radically changed. Sadly, she ended up dying of her disease, but the beauty of it is you could see that even though she hadn't ultimately been healed physically, she had been so healed spiritually. And this is a woman who was heading in the wrong direction. And God, through His grace, working through a number of people, was able to turn her around and bring her back towards Him. So I think just seeing that remarkable story, you ask, how it affected me in a faith way. It was just remarkable to be able to see how God interdigitates Himself into these human situations and brings His love and His attributes, His mercy in particular, and can really change a life and can bring the little sheep back home to Him.
Conversely, you also talk about the experience you had with Linda, which was a different kind of experience that also helped bolster your experience in the faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Linda was just a woman totally full of joy, just one of the most joyful people I've ever seen. And she would come into the clinic, and I'd see her name on the list, and I would get excited that Linda was there because she was just so friendly, and she would be outgoing to everyone, and always kind of humming a little tune. And I would go into the room, and she'd be in there with her husband, and they would be just cracking each other up. I remember one day that she was having her birthday, a little emoji in the chart. It said that it was her 65th birthday, and we all said, oh my gosh, she's by herself here. We can't let this go by. So all of us in the clinic just sort of filed into her room and do a couple of ranks, and all we were missing was a pitch pipe, and then we sang the happy birthday song for her, and she just loved it. And wrote us a note a few days later just about how grateful she was to the staff for being so kind to her. And ultimately, she got a different disease. She got lung cancer from smoking, and it was an advanced case, and we really couldn't do anything about it. And so towards the end of her life, she was in the hospital, and I went by to visit her one last time. And we just spent the longest time talking and reminiscing and just shooting the breeze but having some discussion about some deep things. And at some point, she asked me to come up and sit next to her on her bed. She had her sitting on the edge of her bed, and I was sitting in a chair. So I came up there and sat next to her, and she turned towards me, and then she began to sing. And she had this most beautiful voice. I knew she sang in her church choir, but I didn't know that she sang as beautifully as she did. And it's just in sort of a normal, appropriate voice for the size of the room, but just so beautifully. And it was a song about how grateful she was to God, and basically about how grateful she was that our lives had come together. So I think that's one of the clearest signs of holiness I've read people postulate, and I think it is, that when you see joy like that, that person is absolutely full of the Holy Spirit, and she absolutely was, and made my life better for having known her, and I'm so sure that she made so many other people's lives much better for having known her.
You have an entire chapter in your book on healing that seems to have been influenced by these encounters with these patients. I think that's as good a place as any to end this interview, which is we're all made for healing. We're all made to encounter Christ. So, in about a minute left, can you say a word to exhort all of our listeners that you've been on this journey, you've encountered healing and the touch of God in different ways? What can you say to our listeners?
Well, that God is always on the move. He's always on the move everywhere. And he begins to heal us and open our eyes so that we can see that he's on the move. And he's on the move even in a scary place like the modern medical center, where his love is and healing is most needed. It's most present, and it really is remarkable to see that. And if we see that in that kind of a setting, then just know that it's in every other setting. And healing, not just this physical healing, but healing the whole person, healing them deeply, ultimately healing the person's relationship with God himself. And that is what he's always doing. And all of us have the opportunity to play some role in that. Doctors and nurses in the hospital setting, patients with other patients, family members, and then just again to remember that this whole process is going on in whatever part of the world we inhabit.
Well, thank you very much, Robert, for making the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much, Marcus. It was great talking with you.
My guest has been Robert Collins, Dr. Robert Collins, author of You Visited Me, Grace and Healing in the Modern Medical Center. It's a touching read, very accessible, by Ignatius Press. I greatly encourage everyone to get a copy of it and have conversations about the fact that God can reach us at different levels of our faith journey, and he gives up on none of us. Stay tuned for the next hour. I'm Marcus Peter.